Video games and movies. Cinema's interactive sibling has a profound effect upon contemporary artistic voices.
Thank you.
Film and games continue to have a neck-and-neck spirit, telling cinematic tales in ways only they can imagine, meanwhile influencing one another along the way. More so than most film genres, the influence of video games is most prominent and excitingly experimental in horror thrillers.
Careful now.
Something about the psychological immediacy that comes in these scenarios engages audiences as though they were in the protagonist's shoes. In a day and age where some of our best stories literally give the audience control of their actions, films on the parallel end of the spectrum have been taking note and seem to be learning well.
Okay, how do you play?
First, the aesthetic influence. Several key visual elements have been taken from action and horror games, adapted by cinematographers and directors, like the third-person over-the-shoulder shot. The sight disadvantage in following behind our hero heightens the sensation of being under actual threat of harm, or in the eye of chaotic confusion. Full first-person immersion is still in the beta phase. It's been attempted before, but its heavy presence in video games has revitalized a spark in daring filmmakers. It's still a little too awkward, but the sentiment is legitimate, and perhaps still worth exploring, especially with proper, new tech capable of capturing the effect. Most notable is how thrillers have adapted video game-like implementation of wide shots. More than setting establishment, master shots can serve as a roadmap for scenarios, creating a tableau for dramatic irony to boil up within. This stylization is notorious for early millennium survival horror games, creating dread for whatever's around the unseen corner. The fixed camera angle, now seen as outdated, originally came with an inspired cinematic touch. It was basically inspired by old Hitchcock movies. More on that later. Once again, it returns to the artistically loaded in approach, with modern thrillers playing their cinematic games within such frames. This is evident of an increasingly attentive and engaged viewer base, whose reflexes and expectations have been tested extensively by video game culture, which they grew up with. Moments of white-knuckled urgency to stay silent or remain unseen have become transferred into the audience's mindset, tracking the desperation and button mashing for bated breath armchair gripping.
Perfect! No!
These two mediums mesh well in horror thrillers because of game. In improv comedy, game is basically the funny aspect of a scene, exploited increasingly throughout. Every kind of story has an emotionally rooted game, funny or not. This video has a game, which is how many times I say the word game. I didn't say it was a good one, but whatever.
Sorry, I just got a little excited.
Yeah, well, I'm keeping that point.
Point is, horror and thriller stories exploit fear and tension. The simpler the rules, the more palpable the scenario. Think about the titular game of Don't Breathe. It's as simple as that. Don't breathe. And director Fede Alvarez brilliantly exploits these moments with loaded wide shots and extended sequences of silence on the verge of being broken, highlighting just how difficult and yet important the task is at hand. It Follows is a film all about game rules.
This thing, it's gonna follow you. It could look like someone you know, or it could be a stranger in a crowd. Whatever helps it get close to you. It can look like anyone, but there's only one of it. Sometimes I think it looks like people you love, just to hurt you.
You guys should get in the water.
Halfway through, the movie lets go of the viewer's hand, challenging them to remember the implications of this world system, as dread and threat stealthily break in from all sides.
Do you guys see that girl right there?
Yeah? Yes.
Cinematic moments like this call to mind video game elements, like QuickTime events, call and response tools,
This thing broken?
or how some characters can't even fight and must simply run and hide, which even still is hindered by some fighting sensory factor.
Melissa, where are you?
Film audiences are somewhat helpless in playing these games, but they understand what's correct and what isn't.
What did we forget?
And whenever either extreme is reached, they desire to put the pieces of the film together themselves.
And there's something you don't.
It's just up to a clever director to give them the right pieces.
Too slow.
Video games have also had a lasting impact upon films structurally. The increasingly difficult fight to a big boss, or the excruciatingly elongated struggle with just one throughout, can be attributed to action games pushing players through chapter-based gauntlets, punctuated with big battles and confrontations. Edgar Wright's Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a huge literalization of this in effect. But a little subtler and elegant in execution are Bong Joon-ho's Snowpiercer
We go forward.
and Gareth Evans' The Raid, both developing in forward-style progression. A favorite case study of mine from this year is The Shallows, which plays like a mix of Jaws and Shadow of the Colossus, a game whose structure makes its primary enemies full-on boss battles. It takes the understanding of patterns and rhythms that are key to taking down a big bad, and makes it the main gameplay element. The Shallows does the same, with the marooned protagonist actively being circled by a shark. In order to combat the beast, she charts its speed and patterns, literally like observing a boss's moveset.
Third time. I got you.
Dodge when he swings his hammer, block when he stands up straight, lead the shark through a field of jellyfish. The principle's the same. There's a system to be played and defeated. Her craftiness and usage of bare-bones inventory to MacGyver-esque lengths, reminiscent of point-and-click adventure games, this brings back memories of aha moments, realizing the key to victory after dying so many times at the feet of a boss,
Yes!
or maybe solving a puzzle after hours of backtracking and controller throwing.
And guess what? Ground up moon rocks are pure poison. Still, it turns out they're a great portal conductor.
The player feels like a genius once through.
Space!
Video games haven't only affected the way that films can function, but also how our heroes can save the day and their skin. At its essence, video games are about choice. It's what sets it apart from other mediums. Our last generation of consoles brought back illustrative, choice-based, story-heavy gameplay. Perhaps the most revelatory trend coming out of these games came with an intense focus on morality and story-changing consequence consideration.
This pump will keep me high and dry. But it also means that everyone in this water main will get sick.
Games like Infamous and Mass Effect have both intensified the causality that comes in choosing words and actions, either to be a hero or villain, both in small and large scale, often disguising the latter as the former. Cinematically, the decision-making process is a juicy one to capture, but recent films have openly gamified the scenario. modern horror finds pleasure out of games gone wrong, pitting characters against time or each other.
Ha! You took your blindfold off.
The Saw franchise milked this idea over 10 or so films.
Hello. I want to play a game.
And there's even a series of films dedicated to Ouija boards. Weird.
Just spelled hi friend.
Hey, this is freaking me out.
When done best, films squarely place the viewer in the deciding character's shoes, making clear both options, as well as their consequences. Sometimes characters don't even know they're playing a game yet.
I'm sorry. Ava, I don't understand.
You shouldn't trust him.
Or don't know the deepest implications of their actions. Others are thrown into it, forced to make decisions as quickly as possible.
Okay, hold on. Great, anyone got any smart ideas?
Director of 10 Cloverfield Lane, Dan Trachtenberg, has experience in video games, which he applied heavily in his first feature outing. He said, "You want to know about a character, to assign how you feel about them and then relate to them, as opposed to them just being a blank canvas to project yourself on. That's something I really wanted to impart in this movie, by making it feel less like something you watch and more something you experience. Even in an objective medium, I wanted it to feel as subjective as possible."
Oh God! Thank God!
There's a woman.
Open the door. Coming back.
She looks hurt. She wants me to let her in.
Do not let her in! Look at her face, Michelle!
No.
There's also the audience is putting together a puzzle along with the main character aspect, which I think is a uniquely satisfying way to experience a movie. There's a one-to-one relationship between audience and character. This puzzle extends past backstory solving and practicality, and has recently become a much more psychologically driven game between people with verging motivations.
You can't be in the middle on this one. You gotta have my back this time.
God damn it, Lee! I need you. Please help me.
Who benefits and who ultimately suffers? What's the most fair?
Just choose who you will save.
This is insane. This is nuts. This isn't happening.
Is this a trap?
How do you feel about her?
Can they be trusted?
She's begging me.
You can't help her! No one can!
Open the door.
Cameras linger and observe,
So what happened?
dropping cues for potential giveaways.
Nothing.
What exactly did you see them take?
They was working on the tires. That's all that was took.
Well, they try to, at least. They'll get better at it. There's always a ticking time bomb component, and more often than not, there's always an urge to keep playing through, no matter the cost. Games present a Groundhog's Day style element of being able to go back and do things differently.
Because as you can see, I can rewind time as many times as I want, but I can never make that jump as is.
Cinema is the opposite, though one fantastic exception being in the recently underloved Edge of Tomorrow, whose adopting of Groundhog Day's style more similarly resembled that of someone playing a video game, dying over and over again, slowly getting better with each run through.
Okay, do it.
Most prescient is the accurate level of frustration that comes with the grind.
I'm trying to be nice to you, Maggie. Now move!
Otherwise, films offer one road, leaving the audience in thought of how things have gone down, and how else they could have occurred. This can instill feelings of regret, want, and deeper understanding of situations come and gone, heightening thematic edge through pathos.
Tell somebody who gives a shit.
I'll be fair. Not all of these components are fully rooted in video games. In fact, some of these are classic cinema tropes. I get the feeling you were yelling Hitchcock at me this whole time. That's fair. But, like the Seven Samurai being influenced by westerns, only to then influence westerns through the Magnificent Seven, video games in their 3D peak were heavily inspired by action films of the 80s. Hideo Kojima, creator and lead creative of the Metal Gear Solid series, has pretty much laced his entire career with reverent, loving reference to the Escape from New York franchise, among plenty other action and thriller franchise films. The Die Hards and Terminator 2s of the world were not only legendary for cinema, but for the formative years of action video games en masse. And eventually, those games developed into cult classics of their own. Filmmakers from the late 90s and early 2000s just happened to have spent their previous years in dorm rooms and basements playing Doom 3 and Gears of War, watching Oldboy and Edgar Wright films, etc., etc. The cycle continues. As the years go on, the conversation volleys back and forth. Video games and film will continue to try on each other's shoes and take a look at what they can do that the other can't. Limitation and competition often breed creativity after all. And at the core of it, we all simply like watching people play games. Take for example the Ninja Warrior shows. Or even heist movie planning. Consider the Let's Play culture we're in, wherein watching YouTubers play games is almost as popular as the games themselves. Sometimes people don't even feel the need to play a game after watching it get played by their favorite personality. These films sometimes can be blatant about their trappings.
You didn't like that, because it stinks like jellyfish.
But they're the ones that get shoved into the mainstream with ease. It's like a Trojan horse, sending out a film that is sure to attract audiences, and subsequently giving those audiences a film made with clever, crafty intentions that might actually inspire some imaginations. Who would have thought that would be cool?
What's that?
It's direct audience involvement, flying in the face of spoon-fed storytelling and jump scares. These techniques are a direct underlining of not treating the audience like idiots, and in fact giving them the controller. You gotta give viewers credit, and a chance to put together the puzzle put before them. This makes for good cinematic experiences, worth returning to, or even just looking back fondly upon. Good art engages, no matter the kind of story being told. Being in the shoes of characters in dire straits or wild scenarios lets our minds begin calculating hypotheticals, making our synapses fire as wildly as they would be doing math or playing an instrument. It may be all simulated, but the experimentation upon form continuously leads to better and more exciting out-there art, potentially broadening our view of the world and the stories told from within it, one game at a time. Oh yes, please, let's not talk about Stay Alive.
If you die in the game, you die for real.